everyone. Welcome on Unofficial. My name is Oleg.
And I am Peter Schmalfeldt.
Today we are going to discuss amazing discussion. Possibly maybe unusual that you never expected, but very important every year, every day for everyone is about how to be hired in Salesforce Commerce Cloud. Today we have a special guest, Alex. Alex, hello. How are you?
Hey, everybody. Doing good, doing good. Excited to be on the podcast. Really looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Thank you. Look, I mean, we usually had before technical guys, architect, we have leads of the streams, but we never actually had the recruiter before, right? And most likely there is potentially mystery behind this job. So how you actually get into that job? What's your day-to-day activities? What are you actually doing? Can you just share your story with us a bit?
Yeah, totally, man. So I come from a background in sales heavily. Really interested in connecting with people over the phone. It's something I started out, doing door-to-door sales, back in the day, and as we kind of shift into this whole remote world, I'm a talker, so definitely speaking with people as much as possible. And now, I ultimately ended up at May, which is a niche IT recruitment firm, where I've been heading up our Salesforce Commerce Cloud recruitment desk on a permanent basis for the US for the past 3 years now. And yeah, I just kind of found myself in recruitment, but then ultimately fell in love with the Salesforce Commerce Cloud space, or the Salesforce B2C commerce space, formerly known as Demandware, right? Love the industry, love the space, but found out that you guys had the Unofficial B2C podcast, or the Salesforce Commerce Cloud podcast going on, and I just knew I had to be a part of it. Anything I can do to give back. So ton of exciting stuff on my side.
Alex, you know what? I want to actually go with very controversial question right away and just ask you, what will say that usually it's my personal experience, right, with the recruiter. What you will say when recruiter reach you out, usually and name you by the wrong name. I had number of times when just I get the first message from the recruiter and he says "Hi Olga" or "Hi Juan," and I'm I'm Oleg. Who is Juan? So then I don't feel any personal touch, and I'm just very know that recruiter lost me, right? He lost the battle just from the first message right away. And I'm not even mentioning when recruiters reach me out and say, "Oh, we are looking for the Salesforce architect Apex development," and where do you see Apex development or Salesforce going my side? So just question, how do you actually deal with all these recruiters? Why recruiters possibly could call you by the wrong name, or call you with the different stacks? And what do you think in general about this experience for all of us?
Yeah, no, totally. I think that's a totally valid question. I think for starters, I think that recruiters really have a bad rap, just in general. I think that, first and foremost, everybody's a person, right? We're all human beings at the end of the day. I think that everybody under the sun has sent out an email at one point in time with, a wrong name, or a misspelling or something like that. So I totally appreciate that. But, where it becomes common is, I think that a lot of recruiters, try to take on a lot, and pick up any role that they can kind of get their hands on. They're not every recruiter is super dedicated to one space, or focused in a particular area. And so I think that you start to see, people kind of get a little bit sloppy. What I like to call it in particular is, when you kind of shotgun a market, and it's a really sloppy way of going about it, is, you get a brand new job on, and as opposed to doing your diligence, talking to your own personal network and people that who are looking and stuff like that, people just kind of hit LinkedIn and they're just oh, I have this new job. And again, we're all individuals, right? So people can be excited. I'm sure there's a couple salespeople listening to this on the Commerce Cloud side. You get on this new client and you're just excited about the relationship, so you want to shout it from the heavens. And sometimes that just doesn't work out that well. You get people who make mistakes and it looks sloppy, and you instantly lose out on an exciting candidate because you're not taking the time to either either A, familiarize yourself with, their profile, or B, just like tailor a message. A lot of the times, people try to get too smart for their own good, I would say, and they try to create templates or they try to automate their messaging or something along those lines. And there's like a kink in their formula, where it's like, you mentioned like a particular technology that, maybe you don't even have exposure with, right? And, they're reaching out to you. So that's like something in their like automation messaging where, it's supposed to be tailoring it to, hey, I noticed you have Salesforce Commerce Cloud experience, there are times where, sometimes somebody who, either doesn't have that experience, it's based either on a guess, assuming like, hey, I know this retailer is operating on Salesforce Commerce Cloud. This is a software engineer over there. It says e-commerce, as a recruiter, we're not super technical, so I think that it's easy for us to just make assumptions here and there. But for the most part, at least like for me personally, like I try my level best to like, take the time to understand like the space, and I think that that's what, the difference is. And I think it's easy for candidates and hiring managers for that matter to tell if they're working with somebody who is dedicated to a particular community or if they're ultimately just like looking for, just like generally, they're just picking up any job they can get their hands on or something of the sort.
So with the COVID, right, when COVID like hit the market, actually, does it mean that there was increase in amount of all the opportunities and that's why recruiters usually had to start with those tools? In general, I'm actually wondering like how the market actually changed with the COVID? Like were any changes in terms of, I don't know, maybe customer needs, maybe they have started doing new activities and they're looking for the new skills or new experiences or maybe new trends in the market, and that's why like headless hit it like just recently, right? Maybe I don't know, actually I don't know the market of recruiting, right? Maybe and demand, so maybe you can share with us how actually COVID changed the market and what are the new demands.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really great question. And to kind of keep it on, the unofficial Salesforce Commerce Cloud, like on that topic, right? So for SFCC, like in particular, I think what not I think like what I've seen like firsthand is that the limelight when COVID hit and everybody was forced to go into a remote environment, I think the limelight was really cast upon the e-commerce sector of many of these retailers, right? Like you can't prior to COVID, you might have gotten away with relying on brick and mortar businesses or, focusing heavily on, storefronts, things of that nature. But the second everybody shifted into remote, e-commerce just went through the roof. And so with that said, I think that there was, just that massive limelight that was just put on the e-commerce sector. And so you see these like hiring managers being like VPs of direct to consumer, VP of e-commerce, directors of software engineering, the job titles are endless, but these people were really being, if they had an e-commerce sector that was underperforming, or if they had an SFCC website that was on, let's say like pipelines or site genesis, and it was really slow, right? And you just see that like, hey, we're dealing with so many just crashes, website crashes, or we're losing revenue, because we don't have an e-commerce website that's fully equipped to handle the increase in traffic and because our business has historically relied on brick and mortar retailers, right? We're kind of stuck here and we're seeing all this money. We're losing a ton of money. And I'm sure like people listening can attest to the fact that there were a ton of retailers throughout COVID that just didn't make it, who just couldn't adapt to, the changing environment that we're in. And we just saw like an increase in, the organizations who are willing to adapt, right? They really put like a focus on digital transformation and becoming tech driven first and just like changing the organization. That has to happen through making those internal hires or working with like a Red Van workshop or like a OSF digital and relying on external agency to like support their website because nobody was prepared for COVID, right? And so I think that
yeah, I was going to mention that one of the clients that we worked with, obviously COVID hit right whenever I started working with them. And the very first thing that happened, they're a store that was in the mall, in different stores in the mall in the United States. The malls got shut down. Everything switched over. And at the same time, the hiring for this mattered to them, because now like they had everyone coming into an office, and obviously that also changed, right? Because now there's like people can work remote. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about related to the COVID, but also to just in general, like what changes were necessary for the qualifications for a job, because obviously, like, you know, people who are used to working in an office like may not have remote skills. That obviously is going to be a rather large thing. And if there's any other changes in the qualifications for COVID, and then just probably in general, it'd be good to talk about just what qualifications are in the market space right now for that.
Yeah, but I mean, as it pertains to like COVID in particular, I mean, the whole remote sense, I mean, for those of you out there who have been in the Salesforce Commerce Cloud space since the Demandware days, right? A lot of developers, like in particular, it wasn't really like a major necessity to be on site, you know, in the first place. I mean, I started in this industry before COVID actually hit, and I was working with developers left and right who were just like, hey, I don't really see the need to be like on site, you know, like they have like e-commerce, you know, and the merchandisers and the business owners and people like that on that side, which, hey, I can maybe see like some value in them being there. But, you know, me sitting at a computer, you know, developing all day, you know, I don't really see the value in me being on site. And so there was already that like bubble of people who were like, hey, I want to get into a remote environment, you know. And then when COVID hit, it's like the fountains turned on, you know, and everybody really like pushed into like, hey, now like there's no reason for me to go on site, you know. But I think that that's like a really interesting like point, you know, that you make about you know, how did those qualifications kind of change a little bit. And I think that, you know, being like roughly like 2 years removed from COVID, like when the initial outbreak came through, you know, I think that there's been an appetite now for the market to kind of look at, you know, just kind of be a little bit more receptive to people who you know, maybe not have Salesforce Commerce Cloud exposure, maybe like a really strong like JavaScript developer to break into the space, maybe a strong PHP developer, and maybe even somebody who has like exposure to other e-commerce platforms, right? Like Shopify or Magento, or somebody who had been off platform, like who was exposed to like the pipeline Demandware days, who is now trying to get into an SFRA environment. And I think that those qualifications kind of eased up a little bit so that, you know, A, hiring could be made easier, but then B, that they can, you know, also bring people into the organization who, you know, want to work in that kind of capacity. I think a lot of like old fashioned like retailers were really hesitant to allow for remote work initially. And so I saw most of the pushback for remote work wasn't actually on the candidate side and the developer side. It was mostly on the hiring manager side, where it was like, hey, no, like we've operated in this sense, you know, for 80 years, you know, this is how our business works. You know, we have like people at the helm who, you know, that's just what they want, is for everybody in the company to work on site. And so I saw a lot of that.
Then when you say remote, does it mean that remote from anywhere just be available in the same time zone? Because like, imagine like we have audience here all around the world, US, Europe, Asia, including India, Pakistan, where like in India and Pakistan, there are a lot of developers, like, and there are some people that actually keen to work for the US market directly, and they're able to work in the US hours. They are ready to start their day much later, to work slightly during the night, right? Because someone could be old, right, Peter? I mean, you know how it is. Like, I know your working schedule. I know that you like more working.
I don't know what you're
hours.
trying to say, Oleg, about the age. Come on, man. Just because I got a gray beard.
No, it's just like about old life, right? That you like to work in the evening nights. So there are people who. What I'm trying to say is, does it mean that remote means really remote, or it means to be in the same country, just not in the same city? What's really is behind this remote?
That's a really, really great question. And I think that more than anything, it's a company by company basis, right? It's like it's tough to put, you know, an umbrella and generalize an entire market like that. I see For the most part, though, within the Salesforce Commerce Cloud space, it is remote within the U.S. And the purpose of that is just for like visa sponsorships. I think that that's like probably the biggest one on a permanent basis. There's like a lot of costs associated with visas. And then where I totally appreciate where you're coming from in that like, hey, somebody could, work US hours, and that's totally fine. But I think like, having somebody, a lot of these hiring managers look at it like, hey, having somebody who is based in the US who can, collaborate with our internal team are actually operating on like, these hours. People are awake at this. Also, when you have somebody who is working in such dramatically different time zones too, I mean, in my personal opinion, like I think that, as humans, we operate like the most efficiently in daylight, right? And so, having somebody work like that, I mean, maybe, maybe not, I guess that is both of them are shaking their heads like, no, we're night birds over here, morning birds. But no, I mean, I see a lot of people, hiring managers, they want their employees on the same time. They want them to be in the US. The biggest thing, I mean, I just get a lot of pushback. I don't really like dive into like the reasons as to why it is what it is. It's a lot of just pushback on my side. Like, hey, this is what we expect. This is a job requisition.
Yeah, so Alex, I know firsthand as someone who's been in the U.S. and seen this happen. It is a lot of it is just business because it's if they're not set up to do business outside the United States, even technically like within a state, right? Because each state that a business is in has to file for like to actually be able to employ people in that space. So if they hire a new person in the United States, and like in the example, like there was a nonprofit that I was before Red Band time that was a pretty big one that was looking to hire people, but they were only in Illinois and they weren't in Florida. And so they had to go through a legal process to actually even be able to hire people in Florida because they weren't in the position to do that. So they had to do the incorporations and all the rest of this stuff. So then every single state within the United States would need to have that. Normally HR handles all that, and they, are not. There's a legal precedent for that, doing that for business. But then when you go to the international space, it's the same thing. Like usually you have to have some way to do business legally in the United States across countries. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we were just talking about organizations who are like unfamiliar with even working in a remote capacity, let alone employing people who are in international countries, right? I mean, that's like something that's definitely worth noting as well. And then, yeah, I mean, to speak on your point, I work with several retailers who provide me when I start a search, hey, this is a list of 11 states or 15 states that we can't hire out of because either A, we don't have any storefronts in those states, or B, we just don't have like the taxes in those states are just really aggressive for us, and that's just not really friendly for our business model. And so at the end of the day, as a recruiter, I'd like to act as an extension of their brand. And if that's something that hey, this is how we already operate, it's not then my job to then recreate their whole business structure. I just want to serve to like complement their existing structure and just make everybody's life easier. I'm not looking to like beat any like HR person or anything like that, just really looking to like complement their like what they're doing and act as like like a helpful hand.
Alex, when you say businesses with whom you help, how it changed in recent, like with the COVID and in recent years? Because when I remember when I started my career, like it was still demandware at times, right? Most of demandware work was for the partners, right? You would go and work for the partners, and customers would actually not have their in-house teams who would be like demandware experts. It was really rare, like, and if they would have a team, it would be very small, like maybe 1-2 persons. While right now, if I look in the market, I see that a lot of Salesforce customers actually have in-house teams members, right? So when you say that you help the businesses, who are they? It's usually those brands that wants to build the in-house teams, or you are talking about the partners. Like, what are the demands? For example, let's say I'm a fresh new developer who wants to get to the market. Maybe I'm like in general, I'm a developer, right? Commerce Cloud. Like, what are my chances to get the new job? Like, and in percentage, right? Where like more, I don't know, opportunities on the brand side or like customer side, or maybe on the partner side?
No, I think that's a really great question. And I think that there was like there's levels to that question. I think to address like the to go most recent and then backwards. I think that on the agency, so on the consultancy, the partner side, right? They're hiring year round, right? Like let's be honest, like they're hiring constantly. I've seen like multiple of the unofficial SFCC podcasts. I've seen a couple of the plugs like Rob Smith, right? Like everybody's always hiring on that side of the business. I'm sure anybody would say there's great referral programs out there and stuff like that. But so are the brands nowadays, and to get back to your original question, yeah, there's absolutely, we're seeing a ton of like an influx actually of these internal teams coming about. And I think the reason for that is because these retailers want to establish more internal ownership over their processes, right? And over their workflows, because, what happens is they'll give out their initial implementation or their migration to Salesforce Commerce Cloud to a particular agency, and then what it could be a multitude of reasons why they want to switch agencies, right, or move on to another agency, or things like that. But there's so many different like chefs in the kitchen, if you will, that a lot of times these brands, especially nowadays with COVID and this limelight being cast on the e-commerce sector, it's hard to, when you have so many external like vendors playing around with your site, it's hard to point the finger, right? And say like, hey, where are we going wrong? And so a lot of these retailers are like, hey, we just want to do this internally. If we can get one really strong internal subject matter expert who's been developing on demandware or Commerce Cloud for, 5-10 years or around there, then we can build a team around them. So for those like people who are young graduates, and people who are breaking into the market, I think for them it's the hardest to break into Commerce Cloud. I think that a lot of people, they kind of like stumble into the Salesforce Commerce Cloud space, not really realizing how big of a beast it actually is, or how niche of a beast it is, I should say. But I know that the consultancy side, there's some great academy programs that are going on, to kind of like broaden the space and make like the talent pool a little bit more vast, because I'm sure like any hiring manager looking at this has sat there and had their Commerce Cloud developer position open for weeks, if not months or longer, because the talent pool just isn't there. And so agencies are a really good avenue to do it. But then, like I had mentioned before, those people who are really good with like JavaScript and PHP and other like e-commerce technologies, they have a really viable opportunity to break into the space as well.
Actually, I honestly wanted to ask you about the best time in the year when like developers can start look around, but I feel you already answered that, like any time actually, because they always hiring. Like you want to like, if you feel you want to do a change, you want to look for like always people hiring for the stuff. Maybe you can, I don't know, confirm or not, but if I may, I just want to ask you about a different one. So you said about the skills, right? So what I heard that it really doesn't matter like if you have Commerce Cloud experience or not to get in, but I would assume it's more for the junior kind of the roles. What if, for example, for the more senior roles, like maybe those hiring managers are looking for the more senior roles, like what are those background skills that they're looking? For example, I don't know, working with the payments, like with the payment that he worked with the payments, or maybe he worked in the support role, or maybe he worked with the headless, he worked with site genesis, with SFRA. Like what are potential those skills that usually, at least I imagine like this, I'm a hiring manager, I want to go to your director, I'm saying, hey, look, Alex, this is like key skills I want the candidate have. So you have the pool of multiple hiring managers. So what are those major, let's say, like top 5 or top 10 skills that those hiring managers looking for?
Yeah, totally. Great question. I think that the number one is, because as an external recruiter, and I'm sure everybody in the space gets this, is the number one requirement they want is hands-on development with Salesforce Commerce Cloud and not Salesforce CRM. That's something that like people get like, so many external recruiters, come in and they say, hey, I noticed that you have Salesforce on your profile. Here's a Salesforce admin role, jump on in, right? And that's just not the case in this space. So hiring managers try to sit there and tell me like, I'm looking for SFCC. And when I tell them, yeah, all I do is like Commerce Cloud, they're just like in disbelief. So they have to like kind of explain a little bit more. But number one is always SFCC. I think number two is the people who have exposure to SFRA, headless commerce, where it's great. It's still being introduced, right? I think that there's still growth to be had in that area. Whereas SFRA, as I understand it, Oleg, you would know more as somebody who works at Salesforce. As I understand it, like support for site genesis is starting to like roll off a little bit, at least for the pipelines. And so a lot of these hiring managers know and recognize that, hey, it's either SFRA or it's headless commerce, but those are just whispers at this moment in time. There isn't anybody like, there's no major player that's like, to my knowledge at least, correct me if you guys know better, that's like fully in a headless Salesforce Commerce Cloud environment and like crushing it in that, like seven. No, so those are two, right? That SFRA experience, exposure to like JavaScript controllers is also like really critical. A lot of what I see people have is they'll have exposure to like business manager and content slots, content assets, where that's really good experience. Don't get me wrong. I think that that's like a great start to the rabbit hole. I really do feel, and hiring managers express this to me all the time, is that, they're not really looking for a content developer when they say, hey, I want to employ like a senior SFCC developer. Like I'm looking for somebody who can join the business, hit the ground running and make an immediate impact. And they think that those people are people who have exposure to, some of those back-end projects. But I also hear a lot, especially after COVID hit, like buy online, pick up in store was a major project. A lot of these businesses were like, hey, if you have exposure working on that, that's somebody who I want to talk to. You touched on it yourself, payment integrations. That's always a really attractive skill set to have. If you work with Apple Pay or PayPal and you've integrated that into the checkout, those are like really valuable experiences. But I see you have a question.
Yeah. So what I heard that, I mean, maybe it's my mistake when I was still back in time, like junior developers, when I was filling my LinkedIn profile, I usually would feel like JavaScript, right? Then I would say maybe some technologies. I would say Commerce Cloud, and maybe I would say, let's say payments, jobs, I don't know, let's say some stuff. But I would actually not feel out that I work with buy and light pickup in store like Boppies. I wouldn't feel it as a skill that I experience. Most likely, I wouldn't even feel Apple Pay. I wouldn't feel like that I work with Adyen and CyberSource. So what I hear right now that those developers who are filling their like CVs, right, their LinkedIn profiles, they also have to put some of those key experiences that they work, like those business capabilities, right?
Yeah, those projects, I think that it's such, you're doing yourself a disservice if you spend months and months and months working on an individual project like an ADA compliance project, right? Or you're sitting there and you're working on, there's a ton of projects we can sit here and go back and forth. I'm sure both of you guys have had the opportunity to do, work on some like really exciting projects within the space. But, when people just like kind of skip over that and then they just like page designer, I was just talking to a candidate not too long ago who was, a superstar in page designer, spent like 80% of their time working in page designer, and then it wasn't anywhere on their resume. It was something that they had totally omitted, but it's brand new to the Commerce Cloud space, or relatively new to the Commerce Cloud space. And so just incorporating those keywords, even without having a recruiter, and having like hiring managers or like internal HR teams reach out to you directly, you'll stand out more as a candidate by incorporating those kind of keywords and those proprietary texts into your LinkedIn and your resume.
Since you mentioned the developers like having this extra information on their resume would be helpful, like what's the best way for them to actually kind of list that, or if is it putting on LinkedIn, putting on their resume? Like how do you as a recruiter actually find that and then map that to a business?
Yeah, so oftentimes I'm actually connecting with candidates who, I just like word of mouth have been pointed in their direction. So I'm often connecting with people who don't have like their full Commerce Cloud experience listed. And so, especially for the people who have been at the same organization for, 3 to like 5 years or longer, I really encourage hiring managers within I should start by saying hiring managers within the Salesforce Commerce Cloud space are going to be most interested in your exposure to the platform, right? Like where it's great that, hey, you came as like a .NET developer or, some people like still put like cashier, or like bagger, on their resume for like a technical resume. And like that stuff kind of drives me crazy. But what I encourage candidates to do is to write down a projects list, that you've done within working for the same company. So if you've had the opportunity to work on, 3, 4 different like major projects in your time, to just like concisely write that out, and then maybe like list out like the technologies you've had the opportunity to work on in that time, hey, was this site genesis, was this demand, or was this SFRA, controllers, pipelines, just kind of mapping that stuff out and saying, yeah, I have done things like that. I think that that's like probably the best way. And then again, just integrating like SFCC or Salesforce B2C commerce or demandware into your profile. If you spend all day, every day around the platform, your profile should be screaming it. The hiring manager shouldn't have the opportunity to look at your profile and say, hey, is this an SFCC developer? I don't know. Yes or no. Like it should yell out at them like, oh, okay, this person like is actively developing on the platform and they're trying to like, come across as, a superstar in reality.
When you said about cashier, you actually remind me one of the first versions of my CV where I was like doing with my friends some side projects on WordPress. So we were doing like those WordPress themes, some websites, some small stuff. Just started in IT. We were still students. So my CV actually looked like freelance. It was like called like freelancer, 1 year of experience, and then like WordPress plugins, like other stuff. And then I would have just below pizza maker because I worked like few months in pizza maker. So I want to show that I actually know how to like how to have a job. It's not like it's my first job in my life. I actually know how to be responsible. And I was like, I would put my responsibilities over there. I was making a pizza. I was serving customers. I would be responsible for the money, like in the store to calculate in the end of the day. So I actually was trying to show that, guys, like, yeah, I'm just starting my career, but I'm a responsible person. And then like, I started literally to laugh about that.
Yeah, Alex, that actually raises a really good question. So I had a person that was leaving one job to go to another job, and they hit me up because they were conflicted about their resume. Right? They were being told they actually hired a professional like resume person. Apparently, those exist. Yeah, see, shake your head. And they were recommending exactly what you said, not like is annoying, and I thought was annoying. And they're just like, well, you're a junior developer, yeah, you're trying to get a job in the industry as a junior developer, but you've only been doing, your last job for a year, so you should probably backfill with all of this other stuff. It had nothing to do with it. And my argument was, I think you shouldn't do that. I think you should limit it to just the bare minimum. So yeah, I'd love to hear your take on that and recommendations for people listening.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, especially for junior developers, whether it's like junior, like you're brand new to developing in general, or it's like, hey, I'm a story developer, and I'm just breaking into Commerce Cloud right now. I think it makes way more sense, and not even what I think. It's like what hiring managers want to see, even if there's something we kind of like grazed over. But like, I would also like to kind of get into is like employment gap, especially for those people who like lost a job over COVID or something like that. I think it's more important for you to let's say you've only had one job, right? You're a brand new person in the space, and you only have 6 months of experience, right? I think it makes more sense for you to list all the frameworks, languages, things like that, and like populate an entire one-page resume as a junior developer too. It's also an absolute myth that, like it's like a total myth that, hey, a resume has to be one page too. Like I don't know who started that rumor or where that came about, but there's such great experiences that some people have. You shouldn't make a 10-page resume, don't get me wrong. But I mean, if it bleeds into a second or third page, nobody should be like so totally concerned. Sure, a hiring manager, you can't expect for a hiring manager, and in all honesty, no hiring manager is going to sit there and read word for word every single line of anybody's resume, let alone like, a junior person's resume. But I mean, just having it there, because what they're like, hiring managers are notorious for is just skimming through resumes, right? And so what you really want to do by, populating it with your projects list and your frameworks and your languages is you just want to catch the eye of a hiring manager, because, if you have that one keyword, that one, like, let's say they're doing like a buy online, pick up in store project for their site and they're looking for that, or even if they're not looking for it, but they see that you have that experience, that's going to catch their eye and they might read that line, And so that's where it adds value in terms of adding to that. But I'm forgetting your original question. Sorry.
Yeah, so the original question was just more of like if it's valuable for the people to list out their background of that stuff, and it sounds like the answer is no. Like this, if your case like Oleg, he's a pizza maker, yeah, he's handled money. And like someone else who might want to see that. I've also seen hiring managers similar to what you just responded to, who say that keep it to one page. But then I've also heard that like that's not important, like you're saying, and what's more important is the format and making it easier to find what you're looking for visually. And so if everything's all clustered up and you have to read through it, it's just like no one's going to find it. But if it's somehow laid out in a way that's easier to find what you're looking for, that there's value in that too. Probably more than what's actually on there. But
so Alex, like I have actually one last question on like resume space. What about, and in general also for the skills, what about certification then? Like if I have first of all, like how certifications help or not help? Which kind of certifications actually help, and which, for example, I could have certification of finishing the courses to, cook amazing steak. Should I put it over there? Not like, right? Or like, and maybe I can have Commerce Cloud actual certification, right? It could be different certifications. This is first thing. And then when I'm building my resume, right? Should I put it like on the top, like icons in the very, very top that, hey, I have certification. So when you look on my resume, you see, okay, he has certification. Cool. I'm not even checking what is below because I know he's a good guy.
Yeah, no, that's an awesome question. So for the certifications, I think for starters, just to highlight, like it's the Salesforce B2C Commerce Certified Digital Developer credential. That's what you really want, but also having that same like Salesforce B2C Commerce Certified Digital Architect certification. I know that one's even more like challenging to get your hands on, but I see people, even the people who went through the old DID developing in demandware classes, and who had the demandware certified developer credential. Like those people just omit that from their profile, and it's crazy to me because what I see firsthand in the market is candidates who have that certification. So let's say like, let's use you as an example, Oleg. So if there's an Oleg A and Oleg B, right? And you both started at an SFCC company at the exact same time, right? You both did the exact same projects and everything, but Oleg A got the certification. I'm seeing in the SFCC space that hiring managers are willing to spend roughly $5,000 to $10,000 more on an annual basis for a developer with that credential, because it's basically it's Salesforce's stamp of approval on that developer saying, hey, we endorse this person. We know that this person can develop on our platform. And I've been told by hiring managers, even this week, a very senior person on the partner side told me that, hey, that certification doesn't really matter that much. It's not going to teach you or this or that. But I mean, on the brand side in particular, that's what's really going to stand out. If a hiring manager opens their email and they see 5 resumes and one of them has the certification, I promise you they're going to talk to the person with the certification first, regardless of the experience level. I mean, so long as all things are equal, if somebody has 5 years and somebody has 1 year, I would hire the 5-year person. It depends. I don't want to say that, but there's a multitude of things that kind of tie into that. But those certifications are really, really valuable and important. I know the developer one's only like $200 to take. It's like 100 multiple choice questions, and like 60% is passing. And oftentimes I see like hiring managers will pay, like, or your boss and slash manager will pay for you to like get that credential yourself. So I mean, there's no harm in you just asking for it. Even if you're like miserable in your current situation, there's value in going out and getting it. And then, the worst case scenario, you don't pass it, but then you realize, hey, there's more for me to learn in this space. Best case scenario, I've had somebody take it who, I told him about it on a Thursday. He didn't even realize it was a thing. And by like Sunday or Monday, he had gotten it. He was like, oh yeah, no, it's done. Like, it was super easy for me to get. And it was like, great. Like now, yeah, it was like I know they're scheduled, and it just so happened that it was like that weekend. And it was like such a weird situation because next time I talked to him, he was like, hey, you remember that cert? Yeah, I got it, man. And I was like, what? How is that possible? But no, but then we were able to, because this person already had like they were making a lot in their last position, but they didn't have a lot of experience. And so it was like, hey, in order to help justify what you're looking for in the market, if you went out and got that certification, there's value to be had there. And hiring managers are willing to be more flexible and at least getting your foot in the door. Because then once you get your foot in the door, then you're able to like then go through. And then just to answer your last question, I recommend candidates put that on the top. There aren't really like icons within the SFCC space. Like I know like the trailheads in Salesforce, like you can just put them on the top of your resume. I haven't seen people really do that in the SFCC space. Maybe I'm just not looking at enough resumes. No, I'm joking. But like put them at the top, because then it's instantly gonna like right when the hiring manager starts looking, it's gonna instantly stand out, and they're gonna say, hey, I'm gonna have to do a deeper dive on this resume because of this credential.
Okay, when you say on the top, so on LinkedIn page, there is this like header on the top behind you. I saw some people like putting like they changing manually the image and like putting the certifications over there. Are you referring to that piece? Or?
Yeah. So like you could do that in the Salesforce admin, like on the admin side. I know that you can have like admin certs, like the icons and stuff like that, but I just haven't seen Salesforce Commerce Cloud like a specific icon dedicated to the SFCC developer certification. Maybe it is out there, but not a lot of people do it, or include it. But yeah, I recommend candidates like on their LinkedIn profile for sure. I know the certifications is at the dead bottom, still valuable. Recruiters use LinkedIn Recruiter, which is a really good resource to like pull up keywords and things like that. And so that will like stand out, if you're like really trying to get a job. You'll get flagged for having that certification on your LinkedIn profile. But then on your resume, I encourage like, you have your name at the top, and then no resume is really identical, but for the most part, it's like, certifications. And then right under certifications is like languages, frameworks, stuff like that. Then you get into experience. And then I encourage people like, to just like be robust about your Salesforce Commerce Cloud experience. You can use the interview to then articulate like, hey, I actually have a background in .NET, or, hey, I'm coming from like a Magento background. But you don't want to spend, you want to be concise with the other experiences, and then really meticulous and elaborate with the experiences you have in a Commerce Cloud environment.
All right. So we'll see if Oleg wants to go first, but I've got one that might change the topic a bit, and it is related to basically what the U.S. market rates would be for different roles for developers, which is a whole tangent. So
I had the same question. I wanted to ask the same. It's like, okay, cool. We talked about the skills. We talked about like the change market demands, other stuff. And I was like, okay, I think that anyone who listened to us, like, guys, when you will start talking about the money.
Yeah, exactly. Get to the meat of it all. So yeah, Alex. So the question that I have is, I know that like a lot of developers now know that there's services like Glassdoor that'll like kind of give you insight into like what the expected salary range would be for different areas and all the rest of that stuff. And so there's probably like a band for different skill sets for juniors and, mid-range developers and seniors and architects and all the rest of that stuff. So kind of curious to hear if you recognize those, and if there's anything that makes it different, depending on what your skill sets are.
Yeah, totally, 100%. I mean, it's just like this is something that the market dictates. I talk to hiring managers about this all the time, and sometimes I'll have a hiring manager tell me like, "Oh, well, I know somebody who's not making that much, or I know somebody who's making more than that," or like on the candidate side, like I know somebody who's making more than that. It's at the end of the day, it's like a very niche skill set. So the people who are really good at developing on Commerce Cloud are going to garnish those wages, or they should, for the most part. But to get into like the meat of it, like you said, like from what I see in the Commerce Cloud space, so junior, for starters, back-end developers make more than front-end developers. It's just a fact of the matter. They're in demand all year round. It just is what it is. Full stack developers are just under back-end developers. But then and then it's front-end developers. But to start, so junior developers, I typically see in the US market, I see like roughly somewhere between like 70 and like 100K on the base salary. This is just base salary, right? Every company like is going to have their own bonus packages, 401ks, whatever, things like that. But on the base salary mark, I see like a junior developer with a couple of months of experience or exposure to Commerce Cloud is like 70 to like ballpark 100. Like mid-level developer, I'll see like 90 to like 120, 130. My go-to number was initially like when I first started, 100 to 120 is what I saw. But since COVID has taken place, like I've seen those numbers like live go up, a couple $1,000s. So the developers, I'm seeing like 100, 130. Technical leads, I'm seeing like 140 to like 170-ish. Again, these numbers are starting to get inflated. It was typically 140 to 160 in USD. And then architects are typically like 150, 160 to like 180. On the agency side, I mean, you can have the opportunity with that SFCC architect certification. Like I don't see anybody making like less than like 180. Some of those people are making like 200, 220. But it starts to kind of cap out, and then once you start to see people above that 200K on the base salary range, those are people who are, either going to be on the agency side, who are, dealing with a ton of like people under them. They're like chief architects, or they're in like a particular role where they're overseeing a ton of projects. Or you're starting to break into like director of web development kind of levels, things like that, where it's like, hey, the roadmap's on you, man. Like you have to come up, you've been in the Commerce Cloud space for X amount of years, right? You're going to have to come up with a really strong roadmap. You're going to have to identify which vendor you're going to go with. There's a ton of responsibilities in a position like that, but I typically, to be concise with it, 100, 130 for developers, 130 to like 160 for like tech leads, and then like 150 to like 180, 190 for architects. And those are like technical architects make more than the solution architects from what I've seen, but yeah, I'm sure you guys have a ton of questions.
Yeah, Alex, I actually want to ask, because you were mentioning about like slight differences in financial reward between consultancy partners and brands. So I never worked for the brand myself, right? So I worked for the partner, now working for Salesforce. But what are actually the differences? Like what are pros and cons when you work for the agency or where you work for the brand side, and how it actually impacts you?
Yeah, totally. I mean, to start with the agency side, I think for starters, the most obvious one is just going to be like exposure to more sites, right? More tech stacks, and then having the opportunity to get exposure to the latest and greatest technologies as they're being released, right? Then you also have the opportunity to, be surrounded by SFCC, like subject matter experts. You're going to be working, especially on the consultancy side or the agency side, you'll have the opportunity to rub shoulders with, several like-minded individuals who have robust backgrounds in Commerce Cloud. That's why you're, a gold partner, a platinum partner, things like that, is because you have that internal knowledge. But then on the downside to it, and as opposed to like focusing on the downside, like just to kind of shift over to like the brand side, and some of the pros on the brand side is being on the brand side, you have more ownership over your work, right? You're going to have the opportunity to see projects from start to finish right? There's not, that level of passing work off. You also, will have the opportunity to be looked at as like the internal subject matter expert, or that like internal champion who's looked at as like, hey, where is the work that our vendors putting out, is that quality work? You're going to be looked at and really utilized in that sense on the brand side. But then at the same time, you also like have to kind of deal with the bureaucratic gears of like technological like evolution, if you will, to kind of sound fancy on you guys. In that like, hey, like there's a lot of investment that goes into, migrating just from like pipelines to controllers, and you could still be on site Genesis with that, and so an organization can undergo a project like that and then say, hey, we just did that, we're waiting to see the ROI, and we're not going to make the investment into SFRA until, a couple years, or until Salesforce says, hey, this is totally hands up. So you might have to deal with kind of those aspects, but then you kind of get to be more dedicated on a single website on the brand side. So there's a lot of differences between being on both sides of them. But there's still two sides of the same coin, at the end of the day. That's how I really like to look at it. But yeah.
Look, I'm actually wondering right now, because I heard from you a lot of knowledge today, right? Like in the way how you understand the market, how things works, how hiring manager understand everything. So, and I remember back in time when I was looking for the job, right? I would do everything myself. But then, like, you're also doing like a big contribution in general to the market, right? Of recruitment, actually, to this field. So, what are the benefits actually to work, for example, with a recruiter, right? Like, what are, I know, some processes may be smoother, or what? Like, what's those benefits are, and why actually potential developer would reach out to you, right?
Yeah, I totally appreciate that there are a ton of people in the space who are like, hey, I can do this by myself. I've always found myself a job, things like that. And like, why would I let somebody, in on, my recruitment effort? I mean, the fact of the matter is, and especially this is really pertains to like working with a recruiter that's dedicated to an individual market, right? Somebody who's solely in the space, and no matter how many people you know or talk to, or how much like scrolling you do on like LinkedIn or Indeed or Monster, or wherever you're looking for like your leads and stuff like that, you're never gonna have the opportunity to find like SFCC, like actual like a very long list of, hey, here's 20 companies that are hiring exactly what you're looking for. These are the salary like they fall within your salary expectations, and they're in an environment you can work. And then even beyond that, just working with a recruiter in a more general sense is the recruiter's going to understand and really know what the interview process is, right? They're going to be able to give you tips and tricks on how to move forward in the interview process. And then the biggest thing, like for me personally, like, is I could totally appreciate that when it comes to finding a job, like that can be a full-time job on its own. When it comes to like, if you're really trying to be meticulous and you're really trying to look around, it's a lot of work, man. So just having a recruiter on your team, is somebody who's going to be able to help manage your time, somebody who's going to be able to, just work with you and kind of manage that process so that you're not feeling overwhelmed, and you can have somebody. It's kind of like having like an assistant to a degree sometimes, when I'm like scheduling somebody's interviews for like 2 weeks at a time, or like, a couple days, sometimes I'm like, hey, I'm literally like, hey, just give me access to your calendar. I'll look at your calendar and I'll just kind of squeeze these in, as opposed to you sitting there like, okay, like, and having like somebody come back to you the day of and saying, hey, can you make this interview tomorrow? And, now you're dealing with, okay, well, I don't really have a relationship with this hiring manager, so I don't want to say anything that's going to, set my application back, or, how should I reply to this message? As a recruiter, we already have relationships with these hiring managers that go oftentimes like multiple placements. So we have the opportunity like, hey, we've already had success with this hiring manager. We know them, we know how to talk to them, things like that. And so it just streamlines your process.
So I have one last question on this for people who are interested in using recruiters to find a job. What would you recommend? Like, because obviously, like, this is a big move, right? You're picking somebody to help you find a career, find a job, and negotiate salaries, all the rest of that stuff. But if things start to go wrong in that process, it's like what do you do? You know, like if you're a developer who's trying to get a job, and then maybe everyone's got different skills, and you might get somebody who's not the best, that they're like trying to get you the salary or whatever. Like, so do you have any recommendations for how to watch out for processes that might be failing, or recommendations on like how to
No,
get a better recruiter and things like that?
yeah, totally. I think that the best thing you can really look to do is just be honest, you know? I mean, like, again, at the end of the day, we're all people, you know? And if you feel like, hey, like, my process is being handled sloppily, you know, I'm dealing with somebody who's not like all that great, you know, just be like transparent, be candid, you know? It's so much better, because then this is where more negative stigma comes into recruiters, because then what so often will happen is, or what I'll hear from like other developers, like who I then get into contact with, and then they're like, yeah, no, I'm actually ghosting another recruiter because he mismanaged my process. You know, I'm always encouraging them, like, no, like, don't ghost that person, because then that person's not going to give up. You know, like, that person's going to be like, hey, like, we were really close, I don't know what I did wrong. And then the industry of like recruiters, it's not going to improve, right? Like, we all have to, like, as a community, we have to work together to, you know, be the change that we want to see. You know, if we're going to sit here and just like totally ghost a recruiter, then that person's never going to understand like what they did wrong, and they're going to continue to make the same mistakes, which is just going to ultimately fire back on the recruitment industry and say, hey, you know, I just don't trust recruiters because I had a recruiter mismanage my process. You know, that's a better thing to do than, you know, sit there and just ghost somebody, or something along those lines.
Thank you, Alex, for this. I fully support this idea, and usually it's like, I don't know, one of the values that I honestly care about is to have this fearless feedback. Like, if something goes wrong, share the feedback, because you don't know if the person on that side actually understand that he's doing something wrong, right? I recall in my career cases when people were just discussing like another person is doing something wrong, right? And they wouldn't just reach out to that person. That person would actually was thinking that he's doing really well, right? But then the feedback came in and like it was not that good. And he was like, why? No one actually never came to me and told me that I'm doing something wrong, you know? And then I felt my own responsibility, that it was my fault, because I also, like other people, I didn't came and tell, hey, you know, you're doing something wrong, because I assumed that it's responsibility for other people to come to him, you know, and say it anyway. So from that moment was my learning that all the time, when something goes wrong, I should not fear to go and share my feedback with the person. And I really support as well your way, that we in charge to make recruitment and actual, like, the, you know, the profile and our understanding of recruiters in the better way, right? Let's go and, like, if something goes wrong, like, just be open. As you said, right, in the end we are people. And I love everything that we discussed today about the market, about the changes, about the skills, financial rewards, trends, what certifications are useful, what, you know, and the value of having recruiter. And on this very positive note, I want to give you time where we usually give our guests ability to share their message to the community, right? It's like our, like, it's not a question, you know, it's like more your time where you can share your message to the community. And this is this time. So Alex, what do you want to say?
Yeah, I mean, the number one thing I'd say, I have two things I'd like to say. The number one thing I'd like to say is find a dedicated recruiter, somebody who really knows the platform. I think I'm definitely not somebody who's technical whatsoever, right? Like, I don't like code and Commerce Cloud, but I mean, I can hold my own through these, like, and have these conversations, because this is a space that I'm passionate about and I'm dedicated to. So find yourself, don't like work with somebody who's never heard of Site Genesis before, you know, or SFRA before, you know. If these are keywords that they're just like not picking up, you know, then you should identify a better recruiter to work with. And then the second thing I would say is it's absolutely fine to dictate, you know, the rules of engagement for a recruiter, right? So often I see people who are like, hey man, like, you can't talk to me at this time or stuff like that. But like, again, we're just people. We don't know like when works best for you. So, you know, I'm always telling people, like, I give out my cell phone number, my email, my LinkedIn, you know, the whole 9 yards. And it's like, hey man, what works best for you, you know? But so I think what would be, you know, really helpful for this space is if people were to just tell us up front, like, hey, you know, I prefer to text, and, you know, I'm available from 4 to 6 p.m. That's the time to get into contact with me, so that there's no, like, you know, so often I'll hear somebody say like, hey, I get a call at 3:00 every single day from one recruiter and this guy just doesn't get the message, tell them, just flat out say, hey man, like stop doing this. I know it's you, just stop, just relax. This is the time to talk to me. And this is how I prefer to be spoken to, whether it's email, whatever it is. And I think that, you might find yourself surprised if you've never worked with a recruiter before. If you can like kind of really like dedicated and dictate the times which you can work, I think that you can find a lot of value. And just really looking forward to seeing more episodes here. And thanks so much for having me, guys. It's been great. Looking forward to more episodes.
Thank you, Alex. Definitely. I mean, I love the current episode. And as Peter mentioned in the very beginning, we're actually not expecting, honestly, like both of us, we're not expecting that it can be so valuable. To be like very transparent, right? You said we share feedback and I'm sharing myself.
Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't know how it will go. And now when we are at the end, right, where we will say like, see ya to our like audience, I'm super happy that we had it, that we talked about it. And I really believe that it will be very helpful. I honestly hope that years back when I started my journey, when I was changing job, looking for the jobs, I hoped I would listen to this podcast, I hear you, and then I would maybe do some different choices. I wouldn't put the pizza maker. Everyone, anyway, it worked. I mean, I got my job, but maybe I would not put the pizza maker in my resume, right? Anyway, good. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Alex, Peter, it was an Unofficial podcast. We talked about getting hired in Salesforce Commerce Cloud, and see you next time.